Hey, welcome back to Weeby Kids again. Today's story is a story from a long time ago. A time when the world was very, very different to how it is today. One of the differences is that across the whole of the world, there was only one type of tree. Can you imagine that? I mean, this tree behind me here is a beautiful beech tree. But in that time, there were no such thing as beech trees. And the one type of tree that there was a pine tree. Now you might know pine trees because they're the ones that we tend to use with our Christmas celebrations. They often grow in big forests and they're very, very, very tall and very, very straight. But another easy way to identify a pine tree is to know that they are the ones with their needles and they don't have leaves. But the world, like I said, was very different. And other differences were that there were no roads, there were no cars, there were no schools, there were no trains, there were no houses, there were no boats. But there were people. And there was one group of people that lived together in a village, a tribe you might call them. But they didn't live in houses like we know. They lived in mud huts. And there was this big scattering of mud huts and it was called Jabba Jerome. Now, some of you might have heard of it, but many of you probably haven't. They don't teach about it anymore. But it was off in the far west. And it was set in big, open, beautiful fields. Now, most of the people who lived in Jabba Jerome loved living there. The children in particular really liked living there. They would play off in the long grass. They would collect flowers in the meadows and make daisy chains. They would dam up the streams and make plunge pools where they could play. But there were one group of people who lived in Jabba Jerome and they weren't very happy at all. And those people were the very old people. The great grandmas and the great granddads. And they weren't happy because they were beginning to feel their age. Oof, their backs had begun to hurt, their elbows were sore, their knees were sore, their hair was falling out and their teeth had started to crumble. All they could eat was soup. But they remembered the days from when they were young, like the children too, when they would do cartwheels through the field and roly-polies down the hill. And they just wished that they could be strong and young and beautiful, just like the children. Now one day, one of the old men of Jabba Jerome was sat outside of his mud house and he was having a particularly bad day. He began to cry. He said, I want to be strong and beautiful forever and ever. And his words came out of his mouth. And as they left his mouth, they began to twirl and twist, up and up and up, until they caught the wind. And the wind blew his words through the sky, across the fields and through the meadows, over the mountains and round the forest until they came to a river. And then the wind blew the words up the river, until they arrived at another man who was sat by the river watching the flies dance on the water. And he heard these words come up and they said, I want to be young and beautiful forever and ever. Now this man He was very different to the other man. He had a long green cloak that went all the way down to the ground. He wore a green hat which fell over to one side. He had a long white beard that went all the way down to the ground, and curly white hair that fell all the way down his back. And around his neck he wore a piece of string with a silver acorn. And in his hand he carried a staff. That's right, this man was a wizard. And the wizard listened to the words, "I want to be strong and beautiful forever and ever." And he thought, I know a spell that can do just that. So he gathered all of his things together, and he put them in a cloth, and he tied them onto his staff, and he put it over his shoulder, and he set off walking. And he walked around the forest and over the hills and through the meadows, over the mountains, until he came to Jabba Jerome. And there, when he got to Jabba Jerome, he called all the old people together. He said, "Is it true that you would like to be strong and beautiful forever?" And the old people said, "Yes, it is true, it is true." He said, "Then follow me down into the glade, for I know a spell that will bring you eternal youth and beauty." And the people followed him, and they went down the hill, and they crossed the stream until they came to a big opening. And the wizard took his staff. And he said some magic words, and his staff began to shake. And as it was shaking, he pointed it at the ground, and he lifted it up. And as he lifted it, it made a huge wooden archway. All the people were amazed. They'd never seen magic like this before. And then the wizard said to the old people, "Whoever passes through this archway will get eternal strength and eternal beauty." Now all the old people thought that this could be a trick. They didn't know this man. They'd never met him before. He came here speaking of magic. They all looked worried. But then all of a sudden, without anybody saying anything, as one, they all dived for the archway. And they all got stuck in it. And they were pushing and shoving and trying to get through. And all at once they fell through. And they scattered. Some rolled, some slid. And the wizard stepped back. And he crossed his arms. And he waited for the magic to happen. You see, as every single one of the old people began to get up onto their hands and their knees and reach their hands up to the sky and stretch out, as every single one of them rose from the ground, they all turned into trees. There was an elder and a beech and a birch and an alder and a hazel and a hawthorn. And a little robin came flying out of the sky and landed on one of the trees and began to sing a song of gratitude. And the wizard unfurled his arms and he said, "There you go. You wanted eternal strength and eternal beauty. Now you have it. You see, every spring you'll be blessed with new beautiful buds and new beautiful flowers and beautiful leaves. And in the autumn they will turn to colours of red and gold. And each year you will grow And as you grow, you will grow taller and stronger. And with that, the wizard put his staff over his shoulder and off he went. And he was heading home when he thought he'd better call by Jabba Jerome and tell everybody what he'd done with the old people. So he called by Jabba Jerome and he said to the children, he said, if you head down into the glade, you will see something you have never seen before, and be ready to be amazed. And all the children went running down into the glade, and there they saw the first ever deciduous woodland. Trees of all different shapes and sizes and colours. They began to climb the trees, build dens around the trees, and sit in the shade. And as the children sat quietly, they began to hear voices coming from the trees. And when they looked carefully at the trees, they began to see the faces of their great-great-great-grandmas and their great-great-great-granddads. And the children used to come here every day to spend their time with the trees. But as the children got older, they forgot about the magic in the trees. And that is why I'm telling you this story. So that next time when you go out on an adventure and you go into the woods, take a look at the trees. See if you can spot the faces and listen out to the voices of the trees. So I hope you enjoyed that story. Nice little story about all of the different trees that we have. How lucky we are to have such a variety of trees, and how each tree is its own individual self. I know when I go off into the woods, I can sit with different trees and feel a different way with each one. So when you're out in the woods again, do that. Sit by the trees, look for the faces. You can look carefully. Sometimes you can see whole heads and eyes and nose and mouth in the trees. So have a good tree adventure sometime this week, and we'll see you again at Weeby Kids sometime soon. Bye.